Hello, welcome to our Ask Me Anything series that we are kicking off this year as part of our 90th anniversary celebration of the School of Information and Library Science. My name is Lori Haight, and I serve as the Career Services Coordinator here. And today we have two faculty members joining us. We have collected some questions already, and we can collect additional questions as time allows. If you would like to submit a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of Zoom, and we will get to as many of those as we can. So now for our first guest today, Dr. Megan Winget, Teaching Assistant Professor at UNC School of Information and Library Science. Welcome.
Hi, Lori.
Hi. So we have a few questions that have already come in, so we'll start there. Okay. And then as additional questions come in, we'll try to work those into your time. So first, what courses do you enjoy teaching the most and why?
So yeah, the course I enjoy teaching the most right now is INLS 520, Organization of Information, because I've taught it in one form or another for a very long time, since 2006, with updates and everything. But I know the content, I know when students are going to get confused, and that really allows me to be more confident and to focus more on teaching and sort of engaging the students more. So I'm not worried about what I'm going to say or how to answer questions. I just can focus on the students learning more.
Great. Mm-hmm. Are there any courses you don't currently teach, but also enjoy teaching?
At UT, I taught a course on collecting new media, which was really fun and interesting, and I have not taught it here yet.
So one thing that came in that we wanted to bring up as a question is, how does your past independent consulting experience influence your role as a faculty member here at SILS?
Right, so there were two things about being an independent consultant that that I feel like students, if lots of students are interested in the consulting thing, and there are two things that you need to be able to do, like ignoring the fact that you need to be an expert in a field, right? Like just ignoring that whole piece. But getting work is really hard, and it takes a lot of energy to get jobs, and then communicating your findings in a way that the people who are paying you will appreciate. Right. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I do in classes is I work with students to be able to communicate their value really quickly to people. So to sell yourself and to get used to this idea of like being able to talk to people who may or may not be interested in talking to you, and the whole like networking thing, that's an important and really hard for me piece of the consulting. And then most of my big assignments are not papers. They're usually something like a poster or some kind of infographic or some kind of alternate form of communication, so that they can get used to the idea of communicating complicated ideas, not in a 5-page essay, but in a brochure or making an argument to do something. So that's how I'm bringing the consulting into SILS. And then one extra piece is like giving them the confidence to know that once they graduate, they are experts. Like they know a lot more than most people do, even though they probably usually think that they don't know very much at all. Like they actually know quite a bit, and they could sell that knowledge. Yeah, so that's how I bring it in to SILS.
Mm-hmm. Great. One of the things you mentioned, 2006, is when you had started teaching the class that you enjoyed the most. How has archives changed over the last decade and a half or so, from in what to make sure students know so they can leave here as experts?
Well, archives have changed. They've become, some archives have become more technical. So there's a lot more technical expertise necessary in archives that really didn't exist when I graduated with my doctorate in 2006, and definitely I graduated in 99 with my master's degree. So big, huge technological advances there. And I'm sorry, what was the rest of the question?
So if you're thinking of archives in general and what things we want to make sure our students know to be experts, what were some of the changes that have happened in archives that we need to update our students with over time?
Well, so the being more comfortable with technology is something that I would say that most students need. Even the students who think they're comfortable with technology, I've found that they can get easily freaked out. Like I found myself saying to people like, it's just a typo. Like, you've just made a typo. Like the only problem here is that there's a typo. You know, it's not, this is not a thing that we should be, we need to be really dramatic about. Like you've just made a typo and the computer is just a dumb computer and it doesn't understand what you're trying to say because you wrote, you didn't end the line with a semicolon, you know, like,
Right.
so the confidence to be like, I know what I'm doing. I am better than this machine. Even people who feel confident can still get really flustered over things like that. And so I think for archivists, I don't know if I'm simplifying that a little bit, but even archivists who feel like they know a lot of technology, they're still intimidated. I would like them to be less intimidated.
Yeah. Great. Can you talk a little bit about video games and preservation?
Right. So I have a art history background, and I've always been interested in new media, well, in art. And one of the things that I was interested in was preserving new media art. And I wrote a grant application to do that, and they said that new media art was too broad. I should focus, and so I focused on video games, which was a trick on them because video games can be anything as well. So I did a research study on video game preservation, and what I was trying to look at was what people who were creating video games thought was important. I was interested in this idea of what could change in a game and it would still be the same game, and what could you absolutely not change and it would still be the same game. So I interviewed developers and designers. I interviewed a whole bunch of different kinds of people, and to just see like what it was they thought was like the essence of the video game. And there's two pieces like to the essence of the video game. One is the technical component, like can you physically play the game again? Is the hardware or software or input devices, are they even available? Like there's that whole piece, and it's huge, huge piece. And it's a little bit of the easier problem because you can actually measure like how exactly the game looks or how quickly it's playing, or whether the input device is sending the signals the way it's supposed to be sending the signals, right? Like, so that's something that a lot of people work on. But then the other piece, which is more of a social problem, is like, what's fun about this game? So when I worked on that project, one of my graduate students, one of their jobs was to download old video games and play them, and then write little blog posts on like the experience of trying to emulate the game and playing the game and what were the problems. And it was interesting because these games just weren't fun. And the idea of what was fun like had changed so incredibly that like they didn't even understand. So one of them played this game. It's a famous game, Ultima, one of the first major multiplayer games. And he got stuck in the first thing that you do, which is there's a monster that you have to battle. And he was trying to beat the monster, but what you did to get away was you had to run away. Like that was it, you had to run away. There would never be a game right now, never, where like you're learning the game and the thing that you have to do is run away from the monster. So like he had to go to a walkthrough. He had to cheat essentially to figure out what to do to get past this thing. Like he had spent 45 minutes trying to battle this monster. He's like, man, people in the old days were, really tough. Like they could beat this thing. No, they couldn't beat the thing. So like the whole social aspect of like what's fun and, what why was this game important? Like you remember those pictures of like children running around with like circles, like at the turn of the 19th century, and you're like, that was fun, like a stick in a circle. Like that's how they think of these old video games, that they're just like, man, these people were easily amused. And I guess we were, but
right.
So like making the argument that the games are worth saving, and I found that one of the characteristics of games that were saved from like the 80s was that there was a community around them. And so I got really interested in community building and community engagement around technology, and what that meant, and how it was good for the technology, and how the technology was good and bad for the community that had grown around it. So that's my video game research in a nutshell.
How has your international experience and work influenced your teaching?
Well, I was really young when I went to international. So mostly it's just another one, like it's the same impetus that got me to just be like, well, I'll just be a consultant, like the idea that you can do things. I guess that's really it, because I was so young. So I went to Prague after I got my master's degree in 1991. So for those of you who don't know, that's 2 years after the revolution. And you could pretty much do anything that you wanted. And so the way I made money was I was a real estate agent, and I would rent apartments to mostly lawyers who were coming to Prague. But the thing that I did for fun was I used cutting edge technology of Walkmans to deliver walking tours of Old Town. And also worked with the Prague National Galleries to develop walking tours with cutting edge Walkmans. And it's just sort of I would like students to leave this program with the idea that they can in fact do anything. I mean, I would like people to leave art history programs with that idea, but like with library and information science, I think that that's really more true. Like you have more skills, you have more expertise than most people, you know how to do things, you know how to make things and think about the world in terms of like making stuff and making it better. So I guess I have never really thought of it that way, but I guess maybe that's the way that international work has influenced me.
Someone followed up from your earlier talk about video games. What organizations are interested in preserving video games? Smithsonian, Library of Congress, private groups. Are there any companies that have created libraries of their old games or old games in general?
No. Not that I know of. So I haven't been active in this since probably 2013. I keep up with it, but like the Internet Archive has a huge software collection, and you can go online and play old video games on the Internet Archive. So that's really the biggest one. And then there are game museums like the Strong Museum of Play in Syracuse. I don't know where it is. Ithaca? I don't know where the Strong Museum of Play is. And then there's the Computer History Museum in Palo Alto. And they keep the hardware around. And then there's also a big video game collection at Arizona. But again, that's a community thing. That's just two guys who like go and like collect old computers and stuff and put it in they're professors at Arizona State, but they just like rented a storage space and put all their stuff in it. Like that's the collection. But I mean, it's good, and it's one of the biggest ones. Yeah.
We had another question come in. What are you looking for in a PhD student?
I don't think I am allowed to advise PhD students.
Oh, well, what would you like to see in doctoral students?
Huh?
What would you like to see in doctoral students that you're maybe not advising, but?
Yeah, so what do I like to, that's a good question. As somebody who's engaged with so I would like doctoral students to have experience in the world. Work experience, it doesn't necessarily have to be in information library science, but I think you're better if you have some experience dealing with people and understanding the way that people interact with technology. But that really, like, other than that, you know, I don't need people to, you know, and to be engaged with the questions that they're interested in asking, and maybe with an open mind, because I came in to the doctoral program with one idea and then, you know, switched sort of halfway through. Not incredibly huge switch, but, you know, if you come in and you can only be one way, and you have to, you know, be that way the entire way, and you're going to be disappointed in yourself if you don't follow that one path, then I think you're going to have a hard time. I think anybody would have a hard time.
Yes, I agree. Well, thank you very much. Our time here is quick, so we're
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your participation today. You're accepting for if anybody wants to email you through the SILS directory. Any other questions?
Yeah, megan.winget@unc.edu. Thanks.
Thank you. Great. Up next, we have Dr. Jaime Arguello, Associate Professor, UNC School of Information and Library Science. Welcome.
Thank you, Lori. Hello, everyone.
So we'll go ahead and get started. Can you talk about how your NSF Career Award, which was titled Making Aggregated Search Results More Effective and Useful, wrapped up after 5 years?
So maybe to give a little bit of background for those of us, for maybe many of you who haven't heard of aggregated search. So aggregated search systems are systems like Google that are search engines that actually search other search engines. And so Google, for example, is not just one search engine, it's a search engine for lots of other backend systems. So for example, Google shows you web results, but it also shows you news results and images and video. And it turns out that all of those are actually coming from different systems because they retrieve different types of documents that you need to represent them differently. And they use different retrieval algorithms because what makes a video relevant is very different than what makes a web result relevant. And so aggregated search is the idea of, building these systems that when somebody searches, they send the query or the keywords that you enter to these different backend systems, and then they take back the results, and then they somehow sandwich them all together into one presentation. And so that was really the topic of my dissertation. So I spent like 4 years or 5 years in grad school thinking about algorithms to do the different types of things that aggregated search systems need to do. Like they need to predict which of these different backend systems to actually show to a user. So for example, when somebody does a search, should I be displaying news results or not? And then if you've decided to show news results, then where do you present them? You know, do you present them at the very top, somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the bottom? And so my NSF Career Award kind of continued that line of work, mostly from the human side. It was 5 years worth of research, so I can't summarize everything that we did, but I thought of something that we did do that I thought was really interesting. And that was looking at how people interact with aggregated results. And thinking about individual characteristics of users and how they might influence, their behavior, their perceptions, and the challenges that they might face. And so we looked at cognitive abilities that people have. And so these are things like, strengths and weaknesses that we all have as individuals. And so, for example, we looked at things like perceptual speed, which has to do with how quickly you can scan an information display for information that you're looking for. We looked at working memory, which is how good you are at holding things in short-term memory. And we looked at attention control, which has to do with how easily you're distracted by things that are not necessarily relevant to the task that you're trying to do. And so these are just attributes of individuals, and we all have, we're all strong in certain things and not as strong in other things. And so we looked at these different individual characteristics, and we studied how they influence basically how people search. And one of the main findings is that, you know, if you use a layout that separates the results coming from these different sources very clearly, right? So for example, if you put things in groups, if those groups are very, very clearly marked as being separate and independent, based on their position or based on how they're presented, if you present results consistent with those principles, then that helps people who may have deficits in these different abilities, right? So for example, if you're more easily distracted by non-relevant things, then it really, really helps to always show things in groups, and maybe even show things always in the same position, no matter what you're searching for. So you can very quickly recognize something that's relevant versus something that's not relevant, and ignore parts of the page that you already know are not relevant to what you're trying to accomplish, rather than have a very dynamic display that changes again and again.
Thank you. I forgot to remind our audience that if you joined us late and didn't hear that, we are able to take, we have questions that were sent in ahead of time, but we are, as time allows, able to take new questions. Please use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your Zoom link. So what do you see as your next focus of your research agenda?
Well, so currently, one of the things that I'm really interested in, and I'm not alone on this, there's a lot of people actually interested in this, is thinking about learning during search. You know, we all use search systems to support our learning in different settings. And so there's an entire research community within my field that has sort of woken up to this reality, right? That people use search engines to learn. And so there's kind of been a push towards, you know, how do we design systems to support learning? And how do we evaluate systems based on learning outcomes as an important outcome of search? And so that's something that I'm kind of really interested at the moment. And it requires research in lots of different directions. So for example, from like a methodological perspective, you know, how do we run experiments where we design systems to support learning, but we also measure learning as an important experimental outcome, right? And so how do we manipulate learning objectives that we give to study participants to try to accomplish? And then how do we design assessment materials that reliably measure whether those objectives are being met, or the extent to which those objectives are being met? So there's a lot of research that I'm currently doing from a methodological perspective, which basically the contribution there is to gain insights into how to study this problem. And then there's other research that kind of tries to get more at the solution, which is, you know, how do we develop tools to support learning? A lot of these tools are tools that are not mainstream tools, like, for example, developing tools to help you organize the information that you're finding. So tools that help you kind of externalize what you're learning into some representation that is there, and you can see it, you can work with it, you can manipulate it. And it turns out that those kinds of things really help. You know, in the mainstream, these tools are not necessarily part of the search environments that we interact with on a daily basis, like Google, but I think that in the future they will be. And the other part of that is, how do we develop search algorithms that are better at supporting learning, right? Which has to do with, you know, not just giving you things that are relevant to the query that you're, you know, to the keywords that you enter, but search results that are informed by what you know, what you don't know, your learning objective, what kind of information best supports that objective, and then how do you give somebody information that is both novel, right? So the only way that you learn is if you get exposed to things that are not, that you don't already know.
Right.
But they also have to be consistent somehow to things that you do already know, right? So you kind of have, you want to find this sweet spot of giving you things that are going to allow you to learn, but also giving you things that are understandable based on your prior knowledge. So you're trying to basically give things where people are going to be able to gain something from it, right? And it has to do with giving you things that are novel and also giving you things that are understandable.
We had a question come in that said, how does the research you do actually improve search systems like Google? Do their developers read your papers and make changes?
They do actually. You know, I go to conferences and I present my research at conferences that are attended by people in academia as well as people from industry. There's a big industry component in my research community. I collaborate with people from Microsoft and I have another collaborator at Google. And so, you know, I influence, well, at least I try to influence not just influence everything, really influence the direction that they go. We work together on figuring out how to study a problem, which is a big part of research, not just developing solutions. Those solutions are actually, you know, if you're working on something interesting, the solution comes much later, but the first challenge to overcome is how to study a problem and how to even know if you're making any progress. And so I definitely collaborate with industry, and I keep track of things. I see who cites my papers and things like that. I was really pleased to, you know, Google Scholar tells me when things get cited. And I know that, you know, other research papers cite my papers, but also patents sometimes cite the things that I do, which is a really nice feeling. Usually that takes years and years to sort of, where you kind of see that you know, reap the benefits of that. But, you know, you publish a paper and then 10 years later, you realize that it's, you know, cited by a patent. So it gave somebody an idea, you know, which is nice. Yeah.
Yes, right. Yeah. What do you think is the most ethical search engine that is available now?
Wow, that's a hard question. I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. You know, search engines are heavily influenced by how people use them. All web search engines are heavily influenced by how people use them. And so they're constantly evolving. And in some ways, they're evolving in ways that we don't understand necessarily. And so if I had to sort of pick the search engine that is the most ethical, it probably would be a search engine that's very unpopular and that it's using techniques that are, you know, algorithmic techniques that are not heavily influenced by the way that we interact with them. And so a lot of search engines that that people use within an organizational setting are using open source tools. And I know how those systems work, and they're not, you know, they don't rely heavily on machine learning. They rely on algorithms that are sort of developed using principles. And in a way, they're easier to understand. And it's very clear, you know, and it's easy for, well, at least for me to sort of know what's going on underneath the hood. In terms of systems that are used for web search, I don't have a good answer.
So we've talked a lot about research for you. For turning to the classroom, what courses do you enjoy teaching the most and why?
Yeah, so I really teach mostly two courses. I teach information retrieval and text mining. Information retrieval really is a course devoted to how search engines work. And text mining focuses on how do we use machine learning to develop predictive models for text. I enjoyed teaching both of them. I was trying to think about sort of what is it that I really enjoy about both of these courses. And I think that there's a lot of things that I enjoy, but one thing that I thought about is that they really combine design and implementation. And I see those two things as being separate. I think of design as sort of thinking about what we want the system to do. And then implementation has to do with how do we get the system to do what we want it to do. One of the things that I really like about both of these classes is that it doesn't matter who the student is, it doesn't matter what their background is. We can think about design because we're all users of these systems. And so we all search and we all interact with systems that make predictions. And so, you know, students already have ideas about what they want the system to do. And we also have ideas about, you know, when is the system annoying? When does it make a mistake? And you know, what are the consequences of those mistakes? And so thinking about what we want the system to do is you know, we can start that conversation from day one, which I really like. Now, the implementation part is, I guess, where things get a little bit tricky, right? But there's this idea of like, what do we want? You know, what do we want the system to do? And then we have to think about, well, how on earth are we going to get the system to do what we want it to do? And so, you know, to kind of give you an example from information retrieval, you know, we know that we want the search engine to get us results that are coming from trusted resources, reputable, and so forth, right? So in terms of a design principle, that's something that students can really get behind, right? Now, you know, that's something that we all can understand as consumers of information. When we sort of then kind of take the leap onto the implementation part, then we start to think on, you know, well, how would a search engine do that, right? How would a search engine try to favor information that is high quality, accurate, coming from a trusted resource? And then at first, it seems like a daunting task, right? But then we think about, well, how can we cheat? Right? How can we get a system to do this using the simplest approaches possible, right? And so, for example, in information retrieval, one thing that web search engines do is they favor documents with lots of inlinks, right? So they favor web pages that have lots of other web pages that link to them, right? And if you harness that type of evidence, you start to capture some of this thing that you're trying to capture, this idea of, you know, certain sources, you know, certain pages being more reputable than others. Well, if something is reputable, then it's going to be referenced a lot, right? Other people are going to link to it. And so the number of inlinks plays a role. It's a surrogate for this higher level, more mushy concept that we want the search engine to model. And so I like thinking about, you know, design and implementation. And I think it also kind of opens up the conversations with students, because students quickly realize that, oh yeah, I actually do know a lot about what I want the system to do. You know, I interact with these systems and I know what, you know, how they're good, how they're bad, and all the nuances. It's like, oh, you know, I used Google in this situation and it did exactly what I wanted, but then I used it in this other situation and didn't do what I wanted. And so it's easy for people to kind of understand what they want the system to do.
Well, thank you. Well, our time is up for today. There were some questions we didn't get to, so would you be willing, if students wanted to, or any of our guests today wanted to, email you for any further conversation?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much for your participation today.
Thank you.
And that is our session for today.